I'd like to call the committee of the whole for the Village of Cary for Tuesday, October 17th, 2017 to order with roll call, please.
Betts.
Here.
Hassler.
Here.
Cavalli.
Here.
Kraus.
Here.
McAlpine.
Here.
Weinhammer.
Here.
Thank you. Would you join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We'll now move to the public comment portion where anybody would like to address the committee of the whole on anything other than what's on the agenda. Does anybody have anything they want to discuss? I think we'll go ahead and close public comment. We're going to talk about video gaming next. Discussion on a policy to adopt.
Thank you, Mayor. This evening, provided before the Committee of the Whole is a memorandum that summarizes the history of video gaming within the Village of Cary, and then also some information regarding the revenues that are generated by gaming, and also some other local requirements, other communities. A little bit of history: the state passed the Video Gaming Act in 2009, which established the right for restaurants and other establishments to have video gaming terminals within them. For non-home rule communities, which the Village of Cary is, that statute establishes a limit of how much that we can charge for a license of video gaming of $25 per machine. In order to have gaming machines, the establishment has to have a valid liquor license to serve alcohol for consumption on the premises, and then also has other regulations as far as where the business can be located at compared to other types of land uses like schools and churches. The hours of operation also for a gaming establishment has to coincide with the hours that alcohol is served on the premises. Initially, when the state passed the act in 2009, the Village of Cary had approved an ordinance to restrict video gaming within the community in 2010. In 2013, a few businesses that were existing within the Village of Cary petitioned the village board to allow video gaming within the community. In response to that, the village board did approve an ordinance that established local regulations for gaming within the village. Since that time period, as you see in the table on page 2 of the memorandum, the village has approved licenses for various locations, restaurants that are in the community, and just had a few discussions as far as the policy, as far as what establishments the village would support gaming within. To date, staff has reiterated the policy that has been established by the board or previous boards, was that the village would support gaming as ancillary or accessory to a restaurant use primarily, and that video gaming cafes or those types of uses were not supported. But the policy for the board was that each application would be reviewed on a case-by-case basis as they would come in at this point. Staff in your packet this evening does have proposed modifications to the ordinance that would kind of further solidify that policy, basically looking at some other regulations that other communities have adopted surrounding us, as far as specifically providing regulations for video gaming cafes that would be reviewed, defining that, and then having regulations or as far as the layout of the space that could be used for gaming, number of seats that would be required, in addition to any video gaming terminal that would be added to the establishment. But it's provided for reference. If it's something that the board would wish to pursue, we'd be able to draft a formal ordinance for review and approval by the village board going forward. With that, there are a few in the memo discussion previously, last policy discussion, looking at ways that what the direction from the village board is so we can continue our current policy as accessory to the restaurant use, update the local regulations as possibly drafted here to refine our requirements or potentially no longer allowing video gaming for future establishments or existing establishments going forward. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have. Just there's a request from a board member to have this brought back for discussion, but we're more than happy to talk through the issues and see what direction you'd like to take.
Brian did a good job of laying everything out here, and we've had multiple discussions about our video gaming policy and where we want to go. And previously, the board has landed here on a case-by-case basis to consider video gaming. We continue to get requests at a staff level of proprietors and developers and property owners that are interested in video gaming and bringing that to the Village of Cary. From what I've heard from the village board previously, is the village board isn't very supportive of having the gaming cafes. I do think, and this is a recommendation here from staff, that we need to have a little bit more teeth to the ordinance and provide a little bit more specificity to our ordinance, which is why tonight we are recommending this ordinance that is before you here. It's a very similar ordinance that comes from the village of Algonquin, and it just directly says in here that the village is not in support of video gaming and video gaming cafes, that those are not permitted in the Village of Cary. I think from a staff perspective, that would help us as we work through these cases to have that specifically in writing. I think that this is needed for the Village of Cary and for the village board based on your previous direction to village staff. So as Brian said, we're happy to answer any questions and help you walk through this discussion here tonight.
I have a question. So Bella's Bistro, when they came before us, would they be considered a video gaming cafe?
Well, they would be limited based off the number of seats that they would have in the establishment.
Right,
So
but based off of the proposal that they gave us, I don't recall how many seats they had. So would they have not qualified then?
they would not have qualified for 5 terminals. Under the floor plan that they had roughly in the mid-30s as far as seats in the establishment at the bar and then the tables that they had. They also had more of a retail operation for their business versus a restaurant or gaming cafe type use. So they were slightly different from that perspective. But if you went based off their floor plan for the number of seats that they had, they would be limited to about 3 machines under this requirement.
We would have to go back, I think, with theirs and look at it holistically at all these criteria that we have under this list.
Well, and the reason why I ask is because I was in favor of that business coming to Cary, and I'd hate that if we had something in place like this, that we wouldn't even be able to evaluate that business.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I feel when I read this. It's the first one I thought of.
Yeah, I think you can, that's one of the criteria that's listed in this. We can review every application and say, the square footage of their space that's devoted to gaming is, less than or meets the standards that are in this portion of it. They don't necessarily meet the number of seats, but if they have a large retail component to their business, then that might be a way that we can review their license separately from a gaming cafe. Or a cafe is solely, the main focus of it is to go there for video gambling, and that wouldn't have those other extra amenities that they would offer to customers of the establishment.
So because they have the retail space, then they could be considered different for the 10-seat requirement per terminal?
That would be at the board's discretion, yeah. So I would view that type of license being reviewed, potentially being reviewed differently if it's a different type of business that allows different uses within it.
Okay.
I can weigh in a little bit on this too, because Lindenhurst adopted very similar regulations based on Algonquin. So they have a lot of these same factors. So when a business comes to them, they look, each one of these factors is not you have to meet each one, but it says that these are the factors that can be considered when you're considering whether a particular business is a cafe, which is prohibited, or some other kind of business. So the way Lindenhurst looked at it, they'll look at each business individually and determine, is this intended to be a little mini casino with a couple of bottles of beer? Or is it intended to be a restaurant or a deli, or does it have a kitchen? How many seats are offered? What they've asked businesses to say, what do you think your estimated revenue is? Some of these businesses have other locations, so they can say, well, this is what we do in in Sugar Grove or Spring Grove or wherever. So it's not a one factor determinative, but it's looking at all of the factors together for the board to make a decision whether or not they are a cafe, can't come in, or it would be allowed business.
And to that point as well, we can also require or modify our application that would require them to provide more information as part of the application to make sure that they would, how the business would operate, so the board has more information when you're doing your review to indicate that the certain amount of revenue that the business generates is from food versus retail, and provide you more information and make a better decision for this.
I just think that we have to have some kind of criteria here for how we evaluate these applications, and this is what is provided here in this ordinance is some criteria that you can use to evaluate the request, because this isn't going away. The video gaming, we're going to continue to get requests. It's not just unique to Cary, but you see within the staff report, I mean, it's all over McHenry County.
Let me ask a question kind of piggybacking on what Trustee Cavalli mentioned, because that's a concern that I have also. Because I understand the idea of having some guidance and direction when someone comes to you, you can say, here's kind of the policy. You know, I'm concerned with it. It's very subjective as to whether something meets it or doesn't meet that. But my real question is, someone may say to us that my projected income is, 70% from restaurant and only 30% from gambling. What's our recourse if all of a sudden it turns into a gaming cafe and it's the opposite way? Once we said, okay, they're here. So I mean, that's where I don't know the answer to that. Do we have recourse on something like that? Or, because we can't go to a business and say, give us your financials and show us what your breakdown is after they've come into town.
Attorney
Correct.
Tappendorf, can you respond to that, and if there's ability for the village to, I guess, pull their license at some point?
Sure, if they're in violation of either their liquor license or their gaming license, then they would go through the process. If the village were to cite them for that you could revoke or choose not to renew their license when it comes up for renewal. And I would say, because this particular factor requires at least some showing that they're predominantly restaurant or alcohol service as opposed to gaming, that the village could ask for information to make sure that they are not only in compliance, because, it's estimates at the beginning, but that they are, continue to be in compliance.
So would we specify what it has to be, the breakdown here then? I mean, are we looking to get that detailed where we're saying it has to be a 70-30 split? Or, I mean, I don't know. I'm trying to figure out how detailed are we trying to get on this to not get us into a situation where we're backpedaling if someone comes to us. The environment changes, business environments change. As we're constantly saying, they're morphing and changing based on what the needs of the desires of residents are. So I'm just trying to.
Yeah, from a zoning perspective, our zoning ordinance already has some similar requirements within it as far as how it defines a restaurant versus like a tavern or a bar. So if more than 50% of your sales are from alcohol versus food product, our code classifies those as a bar or tavern, and those are not allowed within our B2 shopping center district. So that's Cary Square Shopping Center, Cary Corner Shopping Center, our larger retail spaces in the town. So they would, obviously, yes, uses change over time, but from a zoning perspective, that would be a regulation that would be in place that would regulate that business as well.
I have a question with, how long is a license, a gaming license? Is it a year or is it
They renew it every year.
every year?
Yeah, it runs in congruently per time periods with our liquor licenses that we review on an annual basis, May 1st through April 30th of each year.
And then, so some of the businesses that have already received a liquor license that might not meet this criteria, and I'm just going to give an example of maybe like the Tobacco Stop or Orchard Prime Meats, would they kind of be grandfathered in where we've already approved them, or would they have to go ahead and meet this new criteria?
We're recommending this to be prospectively, so it wouldn't DQ businesses that already have approval.
Okay,
Well,
thank you.
because Orchard Meats, they're in full compliance. They have a full service kitchen, wait staff. They comply fully. Like another one that we kind of made the decision back when we first started, this was like the Maple Tree Inn. They're not a full service, but we kind of allowed that. But then we decided, moving forward, we need to do something that's going to be a little bit more restaurant oriented. And one of the things that I like about this is, if we encourage them or require them to have a full service kitchen, then they're invested in the restaurant type of an atmosphere, rather than, pulling back. A fear of mine would be that they'd come into the village with an agreement to have a restaurant, but they pull out that service.
Right.
And they're like, that it happens where people just start pulling away from their full service menus, and they limit their menus, and now they're not in compliance. So I think this kind of hits a lot of the nails on the head. It gives us a little bit more regulatory power. Not that I want any type of more enforcement, but it gives staff as well as the board some guidelines to go for. Because, it's here to stay, and it's nice to be able to encourage a full-service business to come in that would give our residents something to benefit from.
And how do we define commercial kitchen? What does that include? Because the bistro was going to serve, sandwiches? So let's say they have a panini press. I mean, at what point, when does it get
Right.
to full-service kitchen?
That's a good question.
Yeah, there's certain, excuse me, from a building code perspective, there's certain equipment that you need to have in a kitchen. So it depends on the type of food that's being provided or cooked at that establishment. So, once you get to certain food products, it requires different elements, like a hood is required once you have, grease-laden vapors and things like that are produced. But it's potential to have a kitchen that produces menu items that doesn't require a lot of certain types of equipment. So as long as they're preparing food on the site and prepping the food, depends on the menu that's being offered, the type of equipment that they have on the property.
I looked at it as more, it's just not there's some peanuts and candy bars back there, and they're making an effort here to provide
Or
food.
throwing something in the microwave.
Yeah. I mean, there's good points that are being brought up here. The businesses change, the environment changes, ordinances can change. I think that this ordinance kind of hits what we're looking for here now. And does this mean that this is what we have to have in perpetuity? No. We can always come back. We can always make changes, see how it works. But I do think that we have to have some guidelines here going forward, that we can, be firm here when people come in and ask if video gaming is allowed and to what level.
Anything back from the side?
Go ahead, Jim.
Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
I just want to be in a position that we don't do something where we cut off our nose to spite our face, so to speak, with regard to, I want someone to say, hey, I want to bring something to your town, but I don't want to be too restrictive, and I don't know if this is too restrictive or not. I'm not saying it is, but I don't want to be in a situation where if someone wants to bring a business to our town and this is part of their business plan, I want to be able to evaluate it on its, I don't want to turn people away ahead of time, if that makes sense. I still want them to come, and I know you need direction, so I'm just kind of trying to weigh it all out and see where I'm at, if that makes sense.
Kind of going back to what Trustee Cavelli had said at the last meeting about case-by-case basis, is that something that we can do, Julie? That if we adopt a policy like this, is that something that if somebody wants to petition the board for something, is that something we give a conditional use permit, or do something that varies from what our?
We could build in some kind of variance. I think the concern right now, from a legal and a staff perspective, is that it is completely ad hoc right now. There are no limitations at all. So if a gaming business goes to the state gaming board and wants to get a state license to operate in Cary, your ordinance says that basically says that gaming's allowed at any liquor establishment. That's what your code says, because you have no limitations. So if somebody goes to the state, they assume they can operate anywhere in Cary if they have a liquor license. And that's problematic from a staff perspective, because people keep coming in and saying, well, I want to operate here, you don't have any limits. And the board has adopted an ad hoc way of saying, we prefer it at restaurants. So what we're trying to do is give some parameters and factors that can be used, and it's within the board board's discretion on how they're interpreted. So commercial kitchen is different for a full-service steak restaurant than it would be for a deli that has sandwiches and lunch food and things like that. So that would be something that would come to you. So I think there is discretion, but there are guidelines and factors to use, so somebody doesn't argue that it's willy-nilly kind of decision, well, we like you and we don't like you. From a legal perspective, I prefer to have some kind of factors. I don't know that you necessarily need a variance. You could build that in. I think it's all in the interpretation. Each business is different, so you'll look at each business. I think that from the perspective of places that are just gaming, with this ordinance in place, if that's something you want to discourage, they'll look elsewhere. So you will be getting businesses that have a food component, that have the primary focus, and the gaming is secondary. That's what this is really intended to do.
From a staff perspective, and I agree with where Attorney Tappendorf is going here, is that staff would not recommend allowing any kind of variance process through this. I think that pretty much just goes back to where we're at right now.
Any other comments?
Yeah, I'll just say, I'm okay with the ordinance the way it's written, and I appreciate the way that it says that with the video gaming cafes, that these factors will be considered, because I think that's not an absolute, but it gives us the discretion on a case-by-case basis to approve or deny, so I'm good with that.
Trustee Cross, you fine with that? You're fine?
When you guys say fine with what's written up here, what's
Correct.
proposed? Correct.
Trustee Fowler? Okay. Thank you.
We'll bring this to one of the upcoming village board meetings here for village board action.
Do we want
Thank
this
you.
on the consent agenda or items for separate action? It was
I'm
pretty
okay
much
with-
unanimous.
I'm okay with consent.
That's fine.
Okay. Thank you. Consent, Jake.
Okay, very good.
Okay, public comment policy.
We've discussed this policy previously here at both committee and also at the village board level. The last time we had a discussion at the village board level, there were a couple changes that folks, I think, wanted to the original public comment policy. We also had received an additional public comment policy, here from Trustee Kostler that he wanted the village board to review. I think the board at the time just wanted a little bit more time to review policy that Trustee Kostler had presented here along with the previous policy. So we have those as Exhibits C and D within your packet. I've also included some additional information here from Attorney Tappendorf regarding an article that she authored here in the IML magazine regarding what the public access counselor with the state has provided. So with that information, looking for feedback here from the village board regarding which direction you'd like to go regarding the public comment policy. From a staff perspective, we do think that having some kind of public comment policy would be effective here for our residents and for the village board so that there's fair certainty for everyone. So wanted to get your feedback here on these policies.
Some discussion?
Yeah, I said before, I'm not interested in limiting the amount of time that the public can come and speak.
So we'll go to Exhibit C, line 3, where you don't want 3 minutes per person?
Line 2, speakers will be limited to 3 minutes per person during the general public comment portion of the meeting unless extended by the board in its discretion. Line 3, limited to 3 minutes per person during the agenda-specific public comment period.
So just so I understand here, the 3 minutes, you want to strike that, and you just want it indefinite of how long they want to speak?
Me personally, but I mean, I haven't heard from the rest of the board. so.
Okay.
Any other discussions on this?
What about the 5-minute time limit? So are you against the 5-minute time limit also?
That's fine. So here's my problem too with that though. If somebody has like another 30 seconds and they just want to go ahead and say what they want to say, I really don't want to cut them off. I want to be able to like let them say what they came here to say, get it out, and be able to address us.
Well, I can speak since I hold the timer and that stuff. I've never cut anybody off. I've always allowed them to finish what their thoughts were. So I think by giving, again, this is just giving the public an understanding of what our expectations are of them and what they can expect from us. In the 5 years that I've been doing this, we've never had a problem with the 3 minutes. We've kind of arbitrarily came up with that. We never had anything in writing. But in all the public hearings and all the various things that we've had, no one felt that they were not being given enough time. I think 3 minutes is, I mean, if you look at just this last meeting, no one really got to their 3 minutes. There may be 1 or 2 people had gotten to 3 minutes and I let them finish their thought process. So I like having some sort of limitations just as the chair here, just so we're all on the same page when it comes to that.
So if you do want to set a limitation, I just prefer it to be higher.
Trustee Kostler had sent us a piece of paper of all of the best practices. And one of the best practices said limited total time period and time per speaker. And they said that an allotment per speaker is about 3 minutes.
That's great, but if I want to hear what somebody came to say, I still want to be able to hear them.
Well, I think, like Mayor Koenig said, that he doesn't stop a person and say, you can't speak enough, 3 minutes is done.
Yeah, just my opinion.
I agree. I think the mayor has been really good about that. But what happens when, if one day you're no longer mayor, it's going to carry through. But I agree. I think you have been very good to let people speak their mind and give them their time and everything else. But I would tend to agree with maybe a little higher time limit of 5. I'd be good with 5 minutes.
I provided an alternative policy just on the basis, well, there's several things, and that was in the email to the board that I sent. But I think we do need a policy that's a sort of an absolute from the Attorney General. But I find Exhibit C, the first policy that was submitted, as I expressed in my email, I have reservations about the constitutionality of it and some of the restrictions that are placed in it, Attorney Tappendorf. So those weren't addressed. My public comment policy that I submitted was pretty general, and it's meant to be a template. And if people want to change anything in it, I'm open to that. I just wanted there to be some more general rules and not such strict rules that we might trip on our own feet when someone comes up to speak.
Attorney Dappendorf, could you address this unconstitutional comment?
Sure. I mean, it really is up to the board, the majority of the board, to come up with your policy, but it's important that that policy be consistent with what the Attorney General's opinions, and there are 3-4 dozen of them. I've read every one of them. And the Attorney General has established certain restrictions based on the requirement of the Open Meetings Act that you provide an opportunity for people to speak, and the Attorney General reviewing policies throughout the state of communities and other public bodies that have adopted public comment policies and how they have applied those. So I feel very comfortable with this policy complying with the Open Meetings Act, and that it does not, in my opinion, violate the First Amendment or the Constitution. These regulations, each one of these has been tested. The 3-minute time frame, the 30-minute total time frame, the ability to remove somebody that's disruptive, the limit to people, one person speaking at a time. That if somebody has spoken once, that you don't have to, but you can deny them the opportunity to speak on the same topic again at the same meeting. All of these have been tested, so I feel confident. That doesn't mean you have to adopt them. that's your decision, that's a policy decision. But from a legal perspective, these have been tested and by the Attorney General, and I feel comfortable about the legality. That being said, if you want something more general, that's fine. I do think, and I mentioned this last year when we talked about this, that it is very important that you do have some policy if you're putting any restrictions at all in public comment, whether it's saying that it's going to be at this point in the meeting, time limits, that sort of thing, that you have something written in place. That's one, because the Attorney General has said and interpreted the law to require that, but two, it provides the public with notice of what the rules are. So people that come to the meeting understand what the rules are. And I think from my experience with communities that have adopted rules, the board operates more efficiently, but the public appreciates knowing what the rules are, as opposed to coming in and they're not really sure. So I think it's a good for both ways, for both the public and the board.
Any other comments?
Sure. My thoughts are that I think one of the things that was brought up that trustee Costa brought up that I'd like to see change, I'm looking at Exhibit C, was in the very last sentence where it says at the very end, the second opportunity for public comment is during specific agenda items when the board has determined the public comment would be beneficial to the board. I'd like to see that removed, just say the second opportunity is public comment is during specific agenda items, and just take that off, because I think you made a very valid point that that's very subjective, who's going to decide when it's beneficial to the board, and if we haven't heard it, we don't know whether it's beneficial. So we certainly want to have that feedback. And I understand not wanting to limit anyone. I think that if you get into a situation where you had 50, 70 people that wanted to talk on a topic, and there may be those opportunities that come up with some developments or people wanting to come out, we want all of them to have an opportunity to be heard. I think that setting a time limit, and I think sometimes we forget, if you're up there talking, 3 minutes is a lot longer than you think. I mean, try and think, I don't know if you remember going back, and if you had speech class and you had to do a 3 or 5 minute speech, you're like sweating going, how am I going to come up with 3 minutes to speak? Again, making sure that we want people to have their voices heard. We're not looking to not allow that. But I've been a champion of trying to get a public comment policy done since I was elected, because I think it is important to let all the residents know, if you're coming here before this board, what should you expect? How is it going to be handled? How are things going to go through? Because it can be a little intimidating. People aren't used to coming before the board, and they're not sure what to expect. If we had something right up there where they could look at it and know what to expect, I think that that does it. I like Exhibit C, but I would like to see that removed from the very first paragraph there. And I'm fine if we want to change it from 3 to 4 or whatever the majority is from a time standpoint, but I think we need to have a limit set there's a way to regulate it.
Trustee Kraus, do you have any comments on this?
I'm leaning towards Exhibit C. I'm fine with taking that out also, in the first paragraph. If we want to go to 5 minutes, then we can go to 5 minutes, but I prefer to stay with 3.
I like Exhibit C also, and to take out that last sentence of the first paragraph. I'm fine with 3 minutes, and that if somebody wants to talk a little bit more, that, the mayor lets them talk more.
I have a question on number 7. It says, no person may address the board or engage in public comment except during one of the 2 defined public comment periods. So there's times when we're having discussion and somebody may have a question, they raise their hand and they want to talk specifically on that item that maybe they didn't come initially for, but then it was raised. So can we, I don't see the need to have 7 in there. Can we maybe just remove that too?
Well, how I look at that is each individual person can talk during public forum. They speak whatever they want. That's something that's not on there. But when something comes up on the agenda, anybody is able to come up. And I try to control that to where people stop talking and get them to come up to the microphone so that everybody can hear. So they're able to speak on, the way I interpret this is they're able to speak on anything that's on the agenda.
Right, I guess the way it says, no person may address the board or engage in public comment except during one of the 2 defined public comment periods.
Yeah, maybe we need to modify that, because the intent is exactly what the mayor said.
Right.
That the point of 7 is that, that people aren't talking in the audience while the board is deliberating and that sort of thing, and that they speak during the time when they're recognized. And so maybe it would be better to modify that to say during the open public comment, whatever that's called, or when recognized during an agenda item. So something along that line. So it's not at any point, that was the point of it. So I think, I understand the concern. I think we can modify that.
Yeah, I agree with trustee Cavalli on number 7. I also have an issue with number 9, just in the respect that that falls under a decorum niceness policy, which is another constitutional First Amendment speech sort of thing. If everybody here wants to leave it in, that's fine, for you, but I don't agree with it. And the last thing, Attorney Tappendorf, there should be, according to best practices, there should be specific rules for addressing public officials in writing. Because if an official isn't at the meeting and they want to address that official, then you're denying them their right to address that official. So if we don't put in here specific rules on how they can email or write their official via US mail, that is not fulfilling the OMA requirement.
It's not, the act only requires the opportunity at a meeting, because it's the Open Meetings Act. So there are requirements under the Open Meetings Act that the website provide information about how members of the public can contact elected officials by email, which is a different piece. Certainly you can add that. The Attorney General does not require that to be part of your public comment policy, because this is a meeting policy. But if the board would want to add a sentence, there's no problem with that. It's not a requirement because of the other provision in the OMA that requires the email addresses to be on your website. And that is the way to contact officials in writing.
We can certainly add that,
But-
just for a benefit for our residents here. I don't see any harm in that.
Any other comments?
If we take out that last sentence in the first paragraph, I know we allow it basically, but then are we basically saying that every agenda item is going to have public comment?
Well, we
Period.
do, we have to
Yeah.
allow that.
You don't have to,
Well,
but you
we
have
do,
done
yeah.
that right as a practice.
But just to clarify, we're removing where it says when, so after that, the comma, is
When
that?
the board,
So trustee McAlpine, the sentence was still going to stay in there up until the comma, correct?
correct, yep.
And then where it says when the board, that's where the removal starts?
yeah.
Okay. I just want to make sure the board's clear on that.
Basically leaving the first part of that sentence in, though, makes us have a public comment period for every agenda item.
Yes.
Okay, then I'm not comfortable with taking out that last part. I'd prefer to keep that in.
So keeping it in means that we'd have the discretion.
Yes.
Well, that kind of negates everything that we just talked about on number 7.
Well, if the chair would allow a public comment period during a specific agenda item, then you could open it up to
Okay.
comments.
Or are you saying just take that sentence and say the second opportunity for public comment is during specific agenda items when the chair recognizes them?
Something to that effect, I think.
Can you clarify that, please, trustee McAlpine, what you just said?
I was just saying Jeff was looking for it to say something to something in the verbiage of the second opportunity for public comment is during specific agenda items when recognized by the chair.
Well, if we leave the board in, then we could kind of have
For the
a
board.
conversation as a board to decide whether or not we want to allow public comment during that time, as opposed to just the chair recognizing if they want somebody to speak during that agenda item.
Then you're saying just leave it as is.
I would just leave it the way it is.
Okay, back to leaving,
And then number 7, if the board decides that, somebody could speak during 4 different agenda items during that night if we decided it was something that was important enough that we felt, we wanted that input, and that, but I mean, I'm pretty much happy with the way Exhibit C was presented to us in the first place.
So no changes to the first paragraph, no changes to 7, and no changes to number 9.
And I would leave 3 minutes in there too.
Let's try to whittle this down a little bit. Trustee Costa, where are you with 3 to 5 minutes? Pick one.
I'm good with either.
Thank you. Trustee McAlpine?
3.
Trustee Kraus?
3 minutes.
3.
I'm not in favor of this one. I'm more in favor of Exhibit D. So
No. Trustee Cavelli, 3 or 5?
I prefer 5.
Well, we're kind of, all
I'll go with 5 then.
right, I could live with 5. Everybody else live with 5? We're being flexible
I
here?
can live with
That's
5.
fine.
Moving
Absolutely.
forward on this? Okay.
And that would be 5 on either the
Well,
general or
yes.
the agenda?
Yes. Okay, with the 5 minutes in here, can I get a consensus on who wants it exactly as it's prepared?
I would,
I can live with it as it's prepared.
With the 5 minutes? Trustee Kostler?
No.
Do you want to put?
Oh, with the, go
Do
ahead.
we want to include the contact information for elected officials
Yes.
too?
Yeah, something along the lines of, members of the public can also contact a board member in writing and then reference that the elected officials' email addresses are on the website, something along that line, so
Yes.
people know. Okay.
Yes.
And that would be number 11.
That's okay. Does that change your mind on yours, your vote, no vote?
No, it doesn't, but it does help, but I appreciate that. One other point I wanted to bring up with this is who's going to be following this? Just the village board, or is this a ZPA policy as well?
I think because the ZPA, that's a hearing, so they have different guidelines.
They do, and the way the Attorney General has looked at this, each public body has to adopt their own policy. Now, the ZPA could adopt this as their policy. So if the village board were to put something in place, or they could come up with their own policy. But this would only apply as written to the Board of Trustees.
Okay. They don't fall under the same body of government?
We had always thought that, but the Attorney General said that they do, they're a subsidiary body, but the Attorney General says as a subsidiary body under the Open Meetings Act, they are considered a public body on their own, just for purposes of the Open Meetings Act, and they have to adopt their own policy or adopt the one that the corporate authorities have adopted.
Trustee Betts, the policy as it's presented with,
Writing at the bottom.
with 5, and your yes or no, and adding number 11 for board contacts,
Yes.
your no. Trustee Cavelli?
I liked, I think what trustee McAlpine originally said was when leaving that when the board is determined would be beneficial. I kind of like how we do it now, where we just give people the opportunity to talk in the beginning. If they have something to say during the meeting, they raise their hand and they get that opportunity. Regardless of how we feel, if they should comment or not, we do it anyway. So I'd prefer to have that.
So you would like to have that,
The original,
yeah, that's how we're doing it. It's all going to stay the same. The only change that it would be is to the 5 minutes.
so
And adding number
is where
11.
it says when the board has determined that public comment would be beneficial to the board.
That will stay.
That will stay.
Yeah, I don't like that part. I like the original. The second opportunity for public comment is during specific agenda items. Spells it out clearly. If they have a question during that time, they can ask it.
Well, some of it's going to be in how we how we choose to utilize the policy. And the other thing is keep in mind that if something happened where we said this was not flowing properly, we could come and amend it.
I agree, and I'm just looking at boards beyond us.
And I
You know,
understand that.
That's why I'm thinking beyond that.
Well,
I should,
they can
right now,
always
we do
change it.
that, but beyond us, we may have a whole new board in another year and a half, and they may not.
Right. I guess I look at it and say then they could amend it if they needed to.
Yeah, that's the way I look at it. And at any given time, 2 months from now, we may say,
We
this
could.
is not working, we need to change that.
Right.
I'd like to get some sort of a, I mean, I think this takes us leap years ahead of where we were.
Right.
And this, having something to guide us, I'd like to have, quite frankly, I think it's good the way it is. I agree with what everybody had said. I understand when the board has determined that public comment would be beneficial to the board. That's something that we can decide at that time. So you're going to be a no on this?
Yeah.
Okay, well, it's 3-3, and guess who has to break the tie? I am in favor of how it's been written here. I think it was well done. I originally was fine with when the board has determined that public comment would be beneficial, but I can go either way. It doesn't really matter. It's up to whoever's sitting in this chair. As long as I'm here, I always give people the opportunity to speak regardless of when it is. I try to corral that in, so I'll be fine with that. All right, so we can move this forward for items for separate action as it says the corrections that we've noted.
So to recap, we've got 5 minutes and then contact information for elected officials, correct?
Correct. It was 5 minutes in number 2 and in number 3.
Yep.
You have a question?
Pardon me?
You have a question?
Is it on, would you like to come up to the microphone, please? Is it on public comment policy?
It is, and I'm going to use my 5 minutes. No, I'm just kidding.
It's not been adopted, sir.
I know. That's fine, that's fine. This will
Your
take
name and
30 seconds.
address,
So,
please.
yeah, so Paul and Gallinera, 575 Krenz Avenue. I just wanted to just applaud the board for having a great conversation and a constructive conversation and just a constructive debate on the video gaming policy and the public comment policy. So I just want to come up and recognize you for just watching the way you guys are working together now. In this moment, I just want to come up here and applaud you, so thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
You still have 2.5 minutes. Do we put
That's
that
all I
in
have
there,
to say
that
about
they
that.
have to take 3 minutes? Up to 3
That's up to
minutes,
you.
thank you. Now discussion on an ethics ordinance.
Before you hear Village Board, we've got an ethics ordinance that Attorney Tappendorf has helped us draft. We've had some conversation here at the Village Board level about wanting to have a local ethics ordinance. We've looked at some various policies here. This is the first draft, so we want to get your feedback on this. It's a working document. I'm going to let Attorney Tappendorf kind of review the new language that you'll see within this ordinance that is attached. It's the bold and underlined language that has been added. So, Julie?
Sure. So currently, you do actually have a local ethics policy, and we have talked about that in the past, but basically, your local ethics policy simply refers to state law. So under the 2.82 of the municipal code, you've adopted the Officials and Employees Ethics Act, which is state statute. That is 2.82010, and that's the sections A through J. When you go on page 2, starting with the bold and underlined language, 2.82020, this is just, and again, as Jake said, this is just a first draft. So to get something in writing for all of you to talk about, vet, discuss, so we have some direction on what you're looking for. These regulations, almost all of these regulations have come from various other communities' local ethics policies. So a lot of this comes from the Village of Glencoe ordinance, which you guys have seen before. We provided a copy of that. And some of the regulations have also come from the Village of Glen Ellen. They have a stricter than state statute ethics policy. So some of the regulations come from both of those communities. And actually, those two communities have very similar regulations that are stricter than state statute. So starting on page 2, subsection A is really the sort of the intent of this. What's the purpose or the policy of adopting a local ethics policy? And this just sets out that it's to uphold, promote, and demand the highest standards of ethical behavior from elected and appointed officials or officers, officials, and employees. And this is just the purpose or intent statement. Obviously, you can read that and provide any comments. The language is similar in both Glencoe and Glen Ellen's ordinance, so this is kind of an amalgamation of both. On the next page, we have definitions. One of the first definitions is family relationship or family member. Under state statute, a family relationship does not create a conflict of interest. So if a family member has a conflict or appears before the board with a contract or for business with the village, that does not create a state conflict of interest for anyone on the board. Both Glencoe and Glen Ellen have adopted family conflicts of interest, so that's stricter than state statute, and that's something that we've put in here, again, for discussion purposes, and this would define who would be that relationship, that family relationship that could create a potential conflict of interest. Both Glencoe and Glen Ellen use this definition. I've seen other local policies that have been a little more restrictive to this that would define a family relationship for conflict purposes to only be those members of the family that live in your household. That's a policy decision. Again, this is not a state statute. This is your local policy. So that's something to consider. Financial interest, this is defined very similar in both Glencoe and Glen Ellen. And it is fairly tracks the court cases that have interpreted the state financial interest. So talking about some sort of an economic financial interest in a transaction, which is defined later. So that would create the type of conflict of interest that would require somebody to recuse themselves. Recusals defined, which means you not only don't vote on something, but you also don't participate in the discussion. So that's defined in here as well. Transaction is basically something that comes before the village board or whatever board it is that the official serves on, some kind of approval that would appear before the board that might create the conflict relationship. Under C, this is just a reminder or additional language about not participating in a transaction that would violate state law. And then D, being the local conflicts of interest, would have, and this is where it becomes stricter than state law, would, and this is under 1, would require an official to recuse themselves, to not participate or vote in a matter if they had a financial interest in the transaction before the official, or a family relationship with a person that has a financial interest in the transaction. And that's that provision in both Glencoe and Glen Ellen's policy is stricter than state law. If there is a conflict of interest, there's a process in this section for how you notify the village administrator or his or her designee within 48 hours of the conflict and the recusal. If, and this is additional under 3 and 4, if it's a conflict that would require you to appear before your own board, that you would have to recuse yourself. You couldn't, and this is I think Glen Ellen and Glencoe both have this, you couldn't appear, stand over there at the podium and request relief for something and then come back over here and then vote on something that would approve, let's say, a zoning matter or something along those lines. That would require you to recuse yourself. If it were a matter before another board, so let's say you only needed to appear before the ZPA, So it's an appeal, and they have final jurisdiction. This would either require you to not participate, which you wouldn't anyway, either not appear before the ZPA or disclose your interest before you appear before the ZPA. It's rare that something like that would happen with all of you. If ZPA only has final decision-making authority on a couple of different items, so most anything, if it started at the ZPA, would have to come here anyway, and you would have to recuse yourself. You couldn't appear and then come back and vote on that. E is something that was in both Glencoe and Glen Ellen's ordinance, so it's here for discussion purposes. And this is just a prohibition on disclosure of confidential information, information that you might receive during a closed session, that you might get litigation matters, other types of confidential information. And this would apply not just to you, but also to other officers and employees in the village. Next page, use of authority or influence. These are 5 different regulations. The first 3 are in Glen Ellen's ordinance, and the last 2 are from Glencoe. And I tried to be as inclusive as possible in this, so it's almost a menu for you to pick and choose from. The first one is prohibiting any elected official to communicate with staff to influence the hiring or termination of an employee. So not to influence the hiring decisions, not to use any official position to seek favors. So again, this is some language about not using your position inappropriately. Number 3, not to use your position to misrepresent official policy. Number 4, impartiality. So to be fair and impartial and unbiased in how you work with and treat residents and citizens. And 5, that no one can request or permit the unauthorized use of village property. So those are, again, kind of a menu to choose from, all or some of these. Again, all of these are stricter than state statute. Then the last section is just the penalty. The up to $750 per day penalty, that's just the standard state fine. It can be up to, so it would not exceed that. That's the maximum that you can impose as a non-home rule municipality. The other language is if it were an employee that violated the ethics policy, that you could take disciplinary action up to discharge for that. You could remove from office appointed officials for violation. And then for elected officials, they can't be removed from office or disciplined in the standard kind of way because they're elected, but they could be fined or they could be censured. That's an acceptable manner of punishment, which would be the board punishing one of its own members. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. I'm happy to answer questions, or if you want to take them piece by piece.
Any discussion on this? Do you want to go piece by piece? Do you want to go each section? Does people have specific things that they want to talk about right away, or do you want to just?
I have some specific. Attorney Tappendorf, it appears from what is now in this policy that I've been in disagreement with some of the conflicts of interest things that you and your firm have advised the board on. But I like what you've done here because it seems like you flip-flopped a little bit. And particular.
Excuse me, which
I'm not sure I
section?
understand a flip-flop.
section
This
are
is
you
a
talking
local
about?
policy, not
No,
state
I
statute.
understand that. I'm going to
Okay.
explain.
Can you tell us what section so we can refer to that?
Yes, and I'll start off with the financial interest definition, which states whether it's direct or indirect. That was a big bone of contention that I had with Adam and yourself, and the statement every time was that it had to be a direct conflict of interest. And don't get me wrong here, I like that it says direct or indirect. So I'm in favor of what you put down here. I'm just sort of wondering why, what changed? Why now is it direct or indirect when before it was only direct?
I don't recall the discussion about indirect or direct. I remember discussing that it had to be a financial benefit to the official. So directly as in somebody made a payment to the official, or indirect that it went to someone else and got its way to the official. So I don't remember ever saying it could not be indirect to be a conflict, but there still has to be a financial benefit that flows to the official. And that's true under state statute and under this statute. So indirect still means that the official is getting some financial benefit. The money may not be going directly to them, as in someone's writing a check to them for something, a contract, but that the money is flowing, and it could flow through a LLC or a partnership or something. But that money, again, the financial benefit still has to flow to the official to be a conflict. And that's true under state statute and under this language as well.
Okay. I'm fine with that explanation, and I like that it says both of those. I interpret it a little bit differently, but that's fine. Also, Section C, statutory and common law conflicts of interest. I'm happy that that's included in there, that prohibited conflicts of interest are under statute and common law in the state of Illinois. I think that is another point. I put in my email about 2 months ago that needed to be included, so I'm happy about that. Section D, line 4, this is just more of an edit thing than anything. It says, as defined in this section. So it's line 3, it starts off financial interest. Line 4, as defined in this section. Financial interest, I think, should be put within the definitions in Section B, because that's usually how statutes are written, so.
Financial interest is
Yeah,
defined
it is.
in Section B, so
Instead of, it refers to Section D as in this section, and I think what you meant
I might
to
be looking
do
at the
was
wrong one.
put it in the definitions for Section B.
oh, the section is 2.82. This entire ethics policy is section 2.02. If it's confusing, though, I could say, because the C and D are subsections.
Right.
So I can say, I want to find the language where you're at.
It's
Top
page
of page
4.
Top of page 4.
So as
Page 4.
defined in,
In
and I'll
this
just put
section.
section 2.82.
Sure, that's fine. And then on page 4, section E, I personally have a lot of issue with this whole paragraph, with the notifying in writing, and I also am not really sure how confidential information, it defines it here, but that is very broad, extremely broad, and that concerns me a lot. So I don't know if confidential information should be then also moved to section B in the definitions. But disclosing or improperly utilizing confidential information is pretty subjective. If a board member tells somebody about something, another board member can say you're improperly utilizing that. And where it could be that, well, no, maybe I'm not. I'm trying to properly inform a resident. So this whole paragraph I have issues with. And then the method of enforcing this, I'm concerned with too. Is there an ethics commission that's defined in our code and state statute? How are we going to address the enforcement of this as far as the fine?
Yeah, it's usually enforced by the village board, so,
Self-enforced.
pardon me?
Self-enforced?
Yeah, by the village, the notices, any notices that are in here for recusal, we've put that they would go to the village administrator. That's just for ease to forward them on. But I would see enforcement being the village board.
Even when
You couldn't have, truly, you couldn't have somebody else in the village, an official or department head or somebody else enforcing ethics violations against the board, your elected officials. So it
Okay.
really needs to be the village board.
Okay, and this can also involve employees too, right? So in this, that would apply the same for,
Yeah, typically employees would be, if it were a disciplinary matter or something like that, then it's whoever is in charge of disciplining that
Yeah,
employee. So
we're,
that
we're
would
not
be,
going to, we're not
yeah.
going to get to the ethics commission with employees.
No, that would be, yeah.
We'd handle those with department heads and
that's
myself.
what I was getting at.
Yep.
I
Yeah,
think it's in the handbook. There's an ethics thing in the handbook. Chief, you know that? No? I'm kidding, sit down.
Yeah, employment, any of the employment, that's already dealt with in different ways, whether if you had a collective bargaining agreement, or you have a personnel manual, or you have SOPs, that's separate. But enforcement of the village board, it can only properly be done by the village board if it were a village board member.
Okay, so I don't know, maybe we should just add some verbiage in there that the board will address these issues, or whatever, so that it's clearly dictated and people know what they're up against if that happens.
in one of the previous, well, I guess our current language here talks about the ethics commission. Village staff didn't pull the ordinance that says who is the ethics commission, but my assumption here would just be that would be the village board, would be the ethics commission.
Does anybody else have any comments regarding this?
I just had a question. So where it goes back to confidential information on our email, it states at the bottom, you're not allowed to forward it. It's just the stuff that you send us in an email, even though it's public information, is that considered, with that verbiage at the bottom of our email, is that considered technically confidential?
The emails, I would say the majority of emails that are sent out are public information. So anyone could submit a FOIA and ask for the emails. Specifically, there are times when I will send out information that, and I will put on there, attorney-client privileged, do not share this information. So for the most part, you'll probably see that in my emails that I don't want you to share it.
So that would be the only time
Yeah, it's-
definition of confidential.
Yeah, like I said, almost all the emails, 99% of the emails that staff or elected officials send out, those are public records.
I just want to get clarification on the indirect portion of the financial definition. So Julie, you mentioned the contracts received. So does that include, you talked about the money, right? So if they give it to somebody else and they give it to the entity, that's an indirect form. But what about if somebody's, as a result, could potentially be getting extra contracts? That to me is an indirect financial gain. So I just want to verify that's how I'm reading that financial interest.
There has to be a direct correlation between the financial benefit and the transaction that the board is being asked to approve. So just because somebody appears and then 6 months later might have some business with them, that may not be a conflict of interest because it doesn't rise out of the transaction. There has to be a flow. What the village is considering, if the village is considering approval of a contract, is one of the 7 of you going to financially benefit from that contract? Each action is separate. So do you financially benefit from because you're the person contracting, or are you financially benefiting because you may not be the person contracting, but you're a real estate broker and you're getting a commission? So you may not be getting money directly from the contract, but there's money that flows to you because of the transaction. So that's how the conflict of interest has been interpreted. So direct means that contract is with you and you're a member of this board. Indirect could be that there's some financial benefit flowing to you because the board approved that contract.
So what if you're, we'll use the realtor example. So what if you're a realtor on, let's say, the chamber, and you get referrals from the chamber, and so you are approving chamber money, and as a result of that, there's potential, in my opinion, where you can get extra referrals as a result of that. But we don't know if.
Right, well, there
that's
has to be, I mean, to have a,
potential
right.
indirect benefit.
But it has to flow from the, so if the village is entering into a contract with the chamber for something and paying the chamber money, is the village, and that transaction, that contract, is the money from that contract flowing to the realtor who may get referrals? And if you could tie that together, that yes, that the chamber member said, I'll make sure that contract is approved, and you shoot some more referrals to me. But without that, I mean, there has to be some intentional conduct here. So something that happens 3 or 4 months down the road, if you could tie it back to that, then yes, that there's a financial benefit. But just having a relationship with, let's say you're an employee and you get paid from that business that's now coming in for some completely unrelated contract. If that transaction does not financially benefit you in some way, there's not a conflict of interest. I mean, you all have relationships with all sorts of organizations or, schools and sorts of things that come before the board. Do you financially benefit from that transaction? And that's how conflicts of interest. And again, it could be direct or it could be indirect, but it has to relate to the transaction.
Any other comments? All right, this is just draft one. With taking into consideration what people have said, we can plug this new information in and re-present at a later meeting. But is there anything else anybody wants to add?
I just would like to, I think part of one of the things we talked about was with the ethics ordinance, that we should have a code of conduct also incorporated into it. And I don't see anything in here that's anything about the code of conduct of how we are to conduct ourselves as elected officials. So I'm just curious if there's anything like that that we can also incorporate as we're doing this.
Is that something that the majority of the board wants to include or add in on this?
I would look at it, but I do think we need to still be more restrictive. I understand what you're saying, Julie, and I respect that. But I do think if there's a potential for some sort of financial gain, I think that needs to be included. I just think that that's something that's very important to me.
How much more restrictive do you want her to get?
I think we have to be careful here too. It's a small community. You have people involved in a lot of different activities. You want to make sure though that we don't tie our hands here. Certainly this is a Village of Cary's policy. This is your policy. But I just want to share that guidance before you.
Just going back to what you're saying, Jake, I disagree with you. So the Village of Glencoe has 6,000 residents and they have a policy that is more definitive. So I don't think that we couldn't be more, closer in defining indirect or direct.
Understand, it's just a recommendation. Certainly, this is the village board's policy.
Sure.
So if you want to add information in there, certainly you have that option.
So I'll address the elephant in the room. How's that sound? So what we're really talking about is Ellen McAlpine being on the Chamber of Commerce and whether there's a direct financial benefit that I've garnered from being a member of the Chamber of Commerce. So I'm going to state once again, for the record, I pay the same amount as anyone else to be a member of the Chamber of Commerce, of which I've been a member for about 20 years. Been very involved in local community events trying to help benefit this community. I do not receive any direct or indirect financial benefit from being a member of that. I just want to make sure that we get that out there because I think we're tiptoeing again around it, and that's really what we're talking about here.
Well, you're right. I am talking about
Sure.
you and Mayor Koenig. You're both on the chamber. You both have businesses. And I feel that by voting in favor of the chamber and giving them money, there is a potential And I don't know, I'm not on the chamber, but to me, one of the benefits that they state on there is that you can get referrals for your business. So if somebody calls and they're looking for something, I don't know if you get an extra referral as a result of that. And I hate to even think that, okay? And that's why I think if we put that in there, you guys are not in that position for me to even think that. So that's how I feel. That's the
Sure,
elephant.
and I
There it is.
understand that perception can become reality. And, when you have a discussion like that, and I'm just throwing this out then, is it something where if you're a part of the Fraternal Order of Police that you can potentially have a conflict for voting for anything with regards to our police?
Maybe, but I'm not a member of the fraternal.
Okay, or that you're somehow involved in the police.
Have to be a
You're-
financial gain.
I know, but I'm just saying, you're saying potential, or someone might perceive that.
And the
Or
vote
someone might perceive that I'm just saying that I don't think the idea should ever be to try and prohibit someone that's involved in the community from serving. And I'm just, bear with me, I'm just kind of,
Not my intent, just so
Okay.
we're clear on that.
Okay.
Again, I just think if one of the benefits gained from being a member is to receive referrals for your business, and we're voting on matters to give them money, to me, that's you scratch my back, I'll scratch your back. And I would hate that this board would be in that position for anyone to ever think that. That's where I'm coming from. For police matters here in Cary, they don't affect my job. It doesn't affect whether or not it changes my salary or my income or anything else
no,
like
no,
that.
and I'm
None of
not
that
saying it does, but what if
But you
another
getting
police
extra
officer?
referrals can.
One at a time.
What if another police officer wanted to run for office here?
What if?
Well, I'm just saying that as an elected official, perhaps people did choose to elect someone that has a business acumen. Perhaps they wanted someone that's involved with their local businesses. I've answered this question that I've had no direct or indirect financial benefit, and I guess I'd like to see the matter be put to rest because it just keeps coming up and coming up and coming up, and I don't think I've changed my answer at all. I think I've been very forthright. When I ran for office, everyone was well aware of that, and I feel like we just keep spinning our wheels on something that we get an answer and you don't like it, so then you try and find another way to get it in, and it just seems to me like we have really important issues to address for serving the residents, and I'm not sure what we're doing with that.
Just with regard to what you're saying, I'm sure people did vote for you because, you're a business owner and you have experience and all that kind of stuff, and you bring a lot to the table. However, when it comes to voting on financial interests for an organization that you belong to and your business belongs to, that's what I'm talking about. Not everything else that you bring to the table here, just that specific topic item.
I appreciate your standpoint on that. We are going to, in life, we're not going to always agree on things, and that's just where we're at with that.
Agreed.
Okay, and just for the record, I'm on the chamber board only as an ex officio. I am there to let them know what's going on in the village of Cary. I don't vote on anything. As a paying member for 10 years, I don't have any voting rights whatsoever. The only reason I go to the chamber board meeting is because it's my role as the ex officio, as the mayor of the community. That's my role there.
No, I understand. And where I'm coming from is your business, is with the chamber.
I've made a policy,
And-
my wife is here, she can go, I've
And-
not taken one. I get calls for businesses in Cary all the time. I said, I can't do it. I just won't.
And that's the portion that I have. It's the referrals. It's the extra business. It's the extra income that you can earn as a result of that. And I'm just being upfront and honest with you. That's
I
all.
appreciate that, I do, but, I think it has a lot to do with self-integrity and what you're doing and what you're doing for the community, because eventually, if you're going to do something illegal, you will get caught, because we have a great chief of police. You will get caught.
do.
But there are times when, I'm pressed to do things, or I'm asked to do things that I say I can't because of the role that I play in this village. That's it. And it's, I understand you made a comment what was very poignant. You said, you don't know what goes on at the chamber. So, and maybe we can have an offline conversation about what goes on and what we talk about, or I could talk what they talk about, what they vote on. It really has nothing to do with any financials. It has to do with things that are going on with programming and that kind of thing. So it's really not a lot of financial stuff that I see. And so, I'd love to be able to put this to bed, and so we don't bring this up
Just so we're
anymore.
clear, from what I've seen, the chamber does a lot of good things for the community. They really do. So please, I understand that. But I also understand part of their existence and part of why people join it is so that they can garner more business for them. And they're trying to make a living for themselves. So I don't blame them for that, and that makes sense. But in this particular instance, when we're voting on financial matters related to that, that's where I just think there needs to be a line drawn. And that's just where I'm coming from.
Could you come up to you have 3 minutes right now.
All right. David Miller, Lake Julian, 65 Highway 14. The chamber isn't a business networking. It is a community activist. We do things for the community. I don't get any referrals out of it. I'm a board member. It's no different than you voting, as I said before, on school things when you work for the school. The school district has stuff they come to the board with. There is no financial gains on being a board member. I've never seen anyone get referrals from the chamber, the Village of Cary, and the Chamber of Commerce's summer bash we have. It's a community event, and I don't know what the issue is why you have this vendetta on the little bit of money that we got. It doesn't make it or break us, and if that's what you're worried about, we will survive it. But I just think it's a great community thing that I think you guys all should be part of. I was really sad to see that everybody wasn't out there for it, but I think it's a great community, and I appreciate everything that the board does.
Thank you.
Can I just, please understand, it's not a vendetta at all. It's really not. So, and it does say right under membership benefits, free referrals. So I mean, they advertise that as part of one of the benefits that you get out of it. So that's my last point that I want to make.
Well, I'm sure, when they talk, I'm sure that there's other businesses that get referrals and that stuff. I don't network through them. I don't cold call through them. I don't do anything except go to their monthly meetings. That's pretty, or an occasional ribbon cutting. So it's like, just to bring the community together. So, all right, Julie, do you have what you need to make some of these changes?
Yeah, I think so. I think that we'll look at the enforcement provision, make a couple of tweaks to the section references. I guess the only thing that I'm not clear on, and maybe we just keep it in the next draft if people, in the disclosure of confidential information. So.
I like, the reason that I saw this together, because, I've been around here for a while, and there's been times when there's an information that's been presented and somehow it gets out into the community. And the only reason we know it got out in the community is because somebody came back and said, this person told me such a thing. And I think it's just, again, it's a self-policing thing. I think it's important that there are things that come up, whether it be a developer, a piece of property that's for sale or whatever, that the confidentiality is meant to only help the village and whatever person is involved. And leaking any of that information, I think, can be problematic as it has proved in the past. That's just from my little tidbit on that. But I'd like to see this, and if we want to have a little working dialogue with that, I'd be up for that as well. But again, just solidifying things, just so we have an understanding. And is there a way that you could address Trustee Cavalli's concerns about maybe a couple of different verbiages regarding more restriction when it comes to the financial outlay, or perhaps a more refined definition of what that is?
Yeah, that's a policy decision. Do you want to take this to the next step, which would really prohibit any board member from acting on anything if they had an interest as opposed to a financial interest? Is that where the board wants to go? I've not seen a policy like that.
No,
but
I don't think that, just thinking
Okay,
about how,
so
I think the Prohibited Political Activities Act in the state of Illinois specifically addresses involvement with nonprofits, and I've brought this up before, that anybody who is a director on a nonprofit who is not appointed by the municipality has to recuse themselves on any vote at the village level.
If there's a financial interest.
No.
But that's where we disagree.
If the village board, if the village board wants to have that language in there, then we can put that language in there. This is a local ordinance. We can add anything that you want to add. So I have already expressed some reservations about putting language in there, but it's up to the board to make that decision.
So in that case, it would be if, and this is the concern in the interpretation is, if you are a member of a nonprofit board, even if you don't have a financial interest, you'd have to recuse yourself if it came before you.
Yes.
But if you are a member of a for-profit board, you would not, under state statute. That's the disconnect. So if you are a member of the board of directors of Walgreens and Walgreens comes before us,
No, because then
then
you
you
get paid by Walgreens.
you can vote on that. But if it were a nonprofit, you could not, under that interpretation. That's why I don't think that the
disagree with
statute,
that.
yeah.
I disagree with that.
Right, I wouldn't recommend that, but that's a policy decision. So you would treat people on nonprofits more strictly than state law treats for-profits.
What were you saying, Jim?
But I think that if you're on the board of directors, you're getting paid by that company. There is a financial interest there, for any for-profit company. So we're talking about different things here. State code is very specific on this, and I already said it, but I think there is a problem here. Anybody who is on the board of directors of a nonprofit, state code, and not appointed by the municipality, state code says you have to recuse yourself from voting. That's what it says. It's black and white.
Well, our attorney is sitting right next to us and has a completely different understanding of that.
I know, and I've had a talk with the state's attorney on it, so I
Yes,
think he
okay.
disagrees.
I would disagree with you on that.
Okay.
Is there any other edits or corrections or that people want to see put in this for the next draft?
Not really for the draft, but I would like to see some social. What did you
Media?
bring up? Media,
The
yes.
code of conduct.
Some kind of code of conduct, some examples of what are out there.
Yeah, just a second. I'm just making some notes here. Jim, are you interested in having some more information on social media? Interpreted
We had
into
the
code?
social media workshop 2 years ago. I don't know if new members of the board want to do that, that's fine. We addressed that then, and there wasn't a consensus that anything was
Well, we have a new
occurring.
board now. We're addressing that now. Is that
And that's
something
what
you'd
I
like to
said,
see?
if the new board members want to address that, that's fine.
Okay. Well, do you want to address it?
I don't have any issue right now with
Okay.
that, but if somebody else does, that's
Trustee McAlpine?
I think that when we're doing an ethics ordinance, that part of that should be a code of conduct and incorporate social media policy in it, yes.
Trustee Kraus says yes. Trustee
I
Beck?
agree, yes.
If the board wants to discuss it, I don't have a problem with that.
Trustee Cavelli?
I was satisfied with our last one, so I'm good with what we're doing now.
All right, so we have a consensus that we can get some more information on the social media policy,
Okay.
please.
I'll work with Attorney Tappendorf on that.
All right. Thank you for your input on this. We'll move this forward to the next step. And we're almost at game time, right at 5 minutes. Go Cubs. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.